The Doves shadow a sequel to The Sacrament of Flesh Part 1. The Museum of Absence Detective Maria Kovac had not entered a church in 7 years. Not since Easter Sunday. Not since the monastery. Not since she'd stood in that chapel and watched Sebastian Dove bleed out his final words about beauty and horror being the same thing from different angles. Now she stood in the Kunsthaus Zurich, staring at an empty room. The placard beside the velvet rope read, Sebastian Dove, The Last Supper, 2018. Deaccessioned, the room still held the table. The massive oak surface gleamed under museum lighting, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the faces of art students and trauma tourists who came to see the space where 13 people had been arranged like a prayer. The chairs remained, positioned exactly as they'd been found, but the figures themselves, the sculptures, as the art world insisted on calling them, had been removed after the 3rd lawsuit, the 7th protest, the documentary that won an Oscar and made everyone complicit in looking. Maria had testified at those hearings, argued that the pieces should be destroyed, not preserved, that they were evidence, not art, that every photograph in every catalog was a desecration of the dead. She'd lost. The art world had theories. The art world always had theories. They spoke of transgressive practice, of corporeal critique, of how Sebastian had exposed the violence inherent in religious iconography by literalizing it. They compared him to Mapplethorpe, to Serrano, to Bacon. They forgot, or chose to forget, that Bacon's screaming popes were painted, that Serrano's crucifixes harmed no one but sensibilities, that Sebastian's medium had been murder. Detective Kovac. The voice came from behind her. Young, American accented. Maria turned to find a woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing the kind of deliberate casualness that marked academics and artists. Dr. Sarah Chen. The woman introduced herself, extending a hand. I'm a researcher with the International Criminal Court's Cultural Property Division. I was hoping we could talk about Sebastian Dove. Maria didn't take the offered hand. There's nothing to talk about. He's dead. The case is closed. The criminal case, yes. Sarah lowered her hand without apparent offense. But there are other questions about the victims, about what happens when atrocity becomes cultural heritage. It's not heritage, Maria said flatly. It's a crime scene. I agree. Sarah glanced at the empty table, which is why I need your help. Part 2. The survivors they met in a cafe 3 blocks from the museum, neutral ground, public enough that Maria could leave if this became one more person trying to romanticize horror into meaning. Sarah ordered tea. Maria ordered coffee strong enough to strip paint. There are 12 of them, Sarah began without preamble. The families of Sebastian's victims. Well, 11, technically. Thomas Schmidt has no living relatives, but the others, they've formed a group. They call themselves the Rememberers. I know, Maria said. She'd received their letters, their calls, their requests for meetings she'd ignored because what could she possibly say to them? I'm sorry I didn't find your son, daughter, brother, sister before they became art. They want the sculptures destroyed, Sarah continued. All of them. The Last Supper, the pieces in Prague and Florence, everything. There's legal precedent, the photographs of lynching victims, the voyeuristic documentation of atrocities. The families have rights. Then why do you need me? Sarah pulled a folder from her bag. Inside were photographs, not of Sebastian's work, but of something else. Gallery openings, exhibition catalogs, a poster for a show in Berlin titled Disciples, Homage to Dove. Because it's not over, Sarah said quietly. The art world has decided Sebastian was a genius. There are retrospectives, graduate seminars, and now she pushed forward a glossy invitation. This, the Dove Foundation for Transgressive Art Annual Gala, an exhibition honoring artists who challenge the boundaries of practice. Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who's behind this? Collectors, gallery owners, people who bought Sebastian's early works and watched their value quintuple after he died. They've established a prize, the Dove Award, 50,000 euros for art that embodies radical embodiment and sacrificial aesthetics. They're celebrating him. They're celebrating what he represents to them, some kind of martyr to absolute creative freedom. They don't think about the 11 families or the victims who have no families. They think about transgression and provocation, and Sarah's voice cracked slightly. My sister was an artist, Emily Chen. She disappeared in Florence 3 months before Sebastian was caught. The words hung in the air between them. She was never found, Sarah continued. But I know. The timeline fits. The location. Emily posted on Instagram about attending one of his gallery openings. And then nothing. No body, no confirmation, just absence. Maria closed her eyes. She'd memorized the files. 27 missing persons across Europe whose disappearances correlated with Sebastian's movements. 13 confirmed victims. 14 maybes. 14 families who would never know. The rememberers are planning something, Sarah said, for the gala. I think they're going to try to destroy the collection. All the pieces that are being shown. Good, Maria said. Sarah looked startled. You'd support that. I'd lead it myself if I could. But I'm a police detective. I enforce laws, even bad ones. Maria leaned forward. What do you actually want from me? I want to understand him, why he did it, whether there were warning signs, whether Sarah's voice dropped to barely a whisper, whether my sister suffered. And there it was. The question Maria heard in her nightmares, asked by all the faces she'd failed to save. Part 3. The archive. Maria hadn't opened the boxes in 7 years. They filled half her garage, evidence boxes marked with case numbers, Sebastian's name, dates of discovery. After the trial that never happened, after Sebastian's death, the prosecutor's office had offered her the investigative files. For closure, they'd said, as if closure came in cardboard containers. Now, with Sarah Chen standing in her driveway at midnight, because neither of them could sleep, Maria cut the tape on the first box. These are his journals, she said, pulling out leather-bound books that smelled of incense and blood. He kept meticulous records. Not confessions, exactly. More like artist statements. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the first volume. The handwriting was beautiful, ornate, almost calligraphic. It described the dove from Sebastian's childhood in language that bordered on poetry. Then it described what came after in language that bordered on nothing human. They read through the night. Sebastian had documented everything: his grandfather's abuse, framed as religious instruction; his father's complicity, framed as necessary discipline; the years in the cathedral dungeon, framed as preparation for sacred work. And then the transition. The moment when the victim decided to become the artist, when the canvas of his own flesh became insufficient and he needed others. He saw himself as a priest, Sarah said, voice hollow, performing transubstantiation, turning suffering into meaning. He was rationalizing murder, Maria corrected. Both things can be true. In the third journal, they found the list: names, dates, locations, Sebastian's victims, catalogued like a bibliography. Emily Chen appeared on page 47, Florence, March 12, 2017. The artist. She understood the work before I explained it. That made the transformation almost unbearable, like killing a version of myself. I kept her sketchbooks. Sometimes I read them and weep. Sarah made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. "Where are the sketchbooks?" she asked. Maria didn't want to answer, didn't want to open the second box. But she did. The sketchbooks, 3 of them, filled with Emily's art, had been stored as evidence. Landscapes, portraits, and on the final pages, something else. Studies of the human form in distress. Bodies bent, broken, arranged, as if Emily had been trying to understand something terrible through drawing it. She was studying him, Sarah whispered. His work, she must have figured out. We don't know that, Maria said quickly. But she did know. They both did. Emily had been researching Sebastian, trying to understand his aesthetic, and in doing so, had marked herself as worthy of transformation. The price of understanding a monster too well. Part 4. The Rememberers. The meeting took place in a community center in Vienna, in a room that smelled of coffee and grief. 11 people sat in a circle. 11 families representing 13 victims. The Schmidt brothers shared parents, and Thomas had none. Maria recognized some of them from the trial proceedings. Others were new faces, aged by loss into something beyond simple sorrow. This was a different species of pain, the kind that came from knowing your loved one had become public property, endlessly discussed, analyzed, photographed, theorized about in graduate seminars. The group's leader was Anna Bergstrom, whose daughter Lucia had become Santa Lucia of the Spine in Florence, was 60, gray-haired, with eyes that had learned to look directly at horror without flinching. "Thank you for coming, detective," she said. "We know this is difficult." "It's not about difficulty," Maria replied. "I want to help, but I need to know what you're planning." The group exchanged glances. "We're going to the gala," said Marcus Weber, father of Peter the stonemason. "All of us. We're going to stand in front of those artworks and tell people what they're actually looking at. Not sculptures, not transgressive practice. Our children." "That's your right," Maria said carefully. And then Anna continued, "We're going to demand that every piece be removed from every museum, that every catalog be pulped, that Sebastian Dove's name be erased from art history as completely as he erased our children's futures." "You'll fail," Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I'm sorry, but you will. The art world has already decided he's important." Museums won't voluntarily destroy works, even works made from atrocity. You'll get sympathy, maybe some policy changes, but the art will persist. Then, what do you suggest? Anna's voice was sharp as scalpels. Sarah looked at Maria, then back to the group. You tell the whole truth, not just what he did, but why. Not just the murders, but the abuse that created him. You make Sebastian Dove's story so complete, so documented, so impossible to romanticize that no one can separate the artist from the crimes. You make him too real to mythologize. A documentary, someone asked skeptically. More than that, a counter-archive. You collect everything: victim testimonies, family statements, psychiatric reports, crime scene analysis. You create a resource so comprehensive that anyone wanting to write about Sebastian's transgressive aesthetic has to confront the actual human cost. You make the truth louder than the art. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then, we'd need help: researchers, lawyers, someone who understands both the art world and the criminal system. She looked at Maria. I'm a detective, Maria said, not an activist. You're the person who saw him dying in that chapel, Anna replied. Who heard his last words about beauty and horror. Don't you want to answer him? Don't you want to say that no, they're not the same thing, that horror is just horror no matter how you arrange it? Maria thought about the empty room in the Kunsthaus, the polished table, the tourists taking selfies where bodies had been displayed. Yes, she said, I do. Part 5. The counter-exhibition, they called it, the Dove's Shadow. Victims, families, and the cost of transgressive art. It opened in a warehouse space across the street from the Dove Foundation Gala. No fancy invitations, no champagne, just fluorescent lights, folding chairs, and the truth arranged on tables and walls. Maria had helped gather the materials. Crime scene photographs, the real ones, not the artistic reproductions that circulated online. Autopsy